The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everybody, and a nice warm welcome to all of our friends and partners who are joining us from all corners of the world today for Daniel Fryer's webinar on men's mental health. My name's Carrie and I'll be facilitating today's webinar. So you are all aware the webinar is being recorded and the recording will be sent to you either today or tomorrow via an email. There will also be a survey that pops up when you leave the webinar. If you'd like to leave some feedback, we would really appreciate it. You will also see a question box on your screen. Please feel free to pop all questions in throughout the webinar and they will be asked to Daniel at the end anonymously. With that, I will hand across to Daniel.
Lovely, thank you. So yeah, hi everybody, my name's Daniel Fryer and I'm a psychotherapist, self-help author and presenter and speaker. I've been working in the field of mental health for about 18 years now, so hopefully I know what I'm on about. There's a presentation today that I'm going to talk you through. I'm going to change ever so slightly. So some of what I say won't be matching these slides, and the reason for that being, I've done a lot of webinars for This Can Happen and their friends and their partners, and usually what happens is the day or the night before I get sent a spreadsheet where questions have been collated, and they're usually very helpful because I can read the questions in advance and start peppering answers and anecdotes through the presentation. And I normally get somewhere between 20 and 40 questions depending on how much interest there is. So a little bit of interest 20, a whole lot of interest 40. And last night I got sent 113 questions based on this particular topic, which is men's mental health. Not just from men themselves, but also people who are worried about them. So we're talking about wives and girlfriends, we're talking about husbands and boyfriends, we're talking about mums and dads, siblings, carers, co-workers, mates, a lot of worried people, a lot of questions. Answering those would be the entire webinar itself. Writing a workshop around that wouldn't be an hour, it would be a morning or a day even, with exercises to help facilitate a deeper understanding. I've only got 50 minutes. I'm also going to speak a little quicker than I ordinarily would because there were a lot of questions also at the end of the webinar when I ran it this morning, so I want to leave as much time as I can for questions at the end of this one. So I'm going to go a little bit faster than I ordinarily would, but hopefully not too fast. So I'm not really going to bother with talking in depth about what the contents is. You'll find that out as I go through. What I want to talk about really that will help address some of the questions that came through is just two main things. And a big one is empathy. And this isn't just for listening to men and what they're going through. This is for everybody. We don't really know what empathy is. We know what sympathy is, and we think sympathy is empathy and empathy is sympathy, but they're two different things. Sympathy is acknowledging that somebody is going through something and offering support. Empathy is understanding from their perspective what they might be going through. Normally when we listen to somebody, we are filtering it through our experience. And so we don't necessarily say what they want to hear or give them advice that would help them. We are talking about things through our perspective, or we'll invalidate it by going, well, yeah, but I did this, so you'll be fine. Empathy means really listening. It means really putting yourself in somebody's shoes and then just finding out or asking or anticipating what they truly need. Using COVID as an example, let's say that I came down ill with COVID, I've got it really bad, I'm at home, I'm self-isolating. Sympathy would be to text me and say, sorry to hear you've got COVID, I know what you're going through, I had it last week, it's horrible, get well soon. Empathy would be to text me and say, it's horrible, I know what you're going through, I've left you a bunch of food on the doorstep, there's enough for meals for the next 2 days, just heat it up in the microwave, I'll be back in 2 days with more, text me if you need anything else. And men, probably more than any other group, need a little bit more of empathy, not batting it away, not invalidating it, actually listening. But they could also do with sympathy as well. We've made great strides in ending the stigma of mental health, and we're doing our best to make sure that every community and every group is catered for, not just in mental health, but in life, in society, so that nobody feels, marginalized, left out. It's not perfect by any stretch. But given the amount of questions that have been asked on this subject, it's obvious that one group is starting to feel left behind. And I noticed that myself. I worked in a psychiatric hospital setting for 7 years, and one of the psychiatrists there was known for her kind of like brisk, no-nonsense approach. So she would attract clients that favoured that, and she would send some of them to a brisk, no-nonsense therapist. And she quite often got young men who she would then send to me for therapy, and they were depressed and they were angry and they just felt lost. And a big part of that is that they'd never had a positive male role model in their immediate circle. So they either had absent fathers, or fathers that didn't bother, or stepfathers that didn't bother, or a series of uncles, men that were just passing through and never stayed around long enough for them to develop a relationship with. They'd fallen through the cracks at school, no one had noticed them, or maybe someone had given up on them too soon. And what they really needed more than anything else was just somebody to hear them, give them their empathy. But I also realized that there were a lot of them that what they really needed more than anything else was that positive male role model to just give them a great big hug and say, I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you, son. I'm proud of you, mate. You've got this. As a therapist, you can't do that. You have to take the long way round. You have to take many, many weeks. You teach them to give themselves that hug. You teach them to tell themselves that they're proud of them. But really, you could have done a lot there in the moment if they just had somebody like that. And between those two things, you could help a lot. Empathy, positive male role models, just to actually complement, just to keep that positive reinforcement going. And a lot of the time we don't. And a lot of the time we don't because of stereotypes. And there are lots of stereotypes about everybody, really. Stereotypes about men, stereotypes about women, stereotypes about what it means to be LGBTQ, stereotypes. Male stereotypes, what it means to be a man, has gone through a massive overhaul in recent years, and we don't know what we're supposed to be. I mean, it's still to an extent slightly true. A few years ago, a woman would go to a doctor and talk about her symptoms and get diagnosed with depression and be put on an antidepressant. Whereas a man would go to see the same doctor, describe the same symptoms in the same words, and have it written off as just a low mood. It'll pass, don't worry about it, because of stereotypes. So what are we? Are we strong? Are we silent? Are we masculine? Are we metrosexual? Can we cry? Can't we cry? Are we tough? Are we tender? Are we meant to be the providers? Are we meant to be the home husbands? What are we meant to be? Role models have changed, and unfortunately, if you haven't got a positive male authority figure to provide you with support and reassurance in your immediacy, we get everything from the media. And the media has done a very, very good job on packaging us, commodifying us, selling to us, and we can do everything that women used to do in terms of looking after ourselves. We can wax, we can primp, we can preen, we can pluck. We're obsessed with our bodies. We can even pajazzle. We can do all of it and more. And all this has done is create in men the same sort of insecurities that women traditionally had. Insecurities about body shape and weight and size, insecurities about personality and characteristics. And men typically are picking up mental health disorders that used to be just women's issues, such as eating disorders, bulimia, and anorexia is on the rise in men. Because as we've commodified and packaged, we've just made them more vulnerable to the same sort of problems and not really yet done enough to address it. We've even got makeup. Men can wear blusher and concealer and foundation. It's not called makeup, a big brand called Warpaint, but it's still makeup. And you've got men selling makeup to men online in videos and tutorials because we've become that metrosexualized, but we're still not quite sure what it means to be a man. And it leaves us feeling vulnerable and insecure, and can we open up or can't we open up, and who do we open up to? There are the statistics. I'm going to rush them because I added all this extra content in that I've just been speaking to you about. But I want to focus on the death by suicides. This is just in England and Wales, because I live in England. I live in Bristol. It's near Wales. But I know this is going out everywhere. But you can Google your statistics anywhere. So you can Google statistics for rates in Scotland, or you can do it by city, by London. You can do it by a state, wherever you are. You just Google it. But the statistics are very, very similar. More men complete suicide than women. More women than men attempt suicide. More men complete it. We use this word complete. We don't say commit anymore. Commit implies a crime, or commit implies a sin, and it's neither of those things. It's the last act of somebody that's got themselves into a very dark place. But when men go for it, they mean it. So there were 1,600 and something death by suicide for women in England, Wales. At the same period, there was 4,003. That figure is actually 2019. In 2021, it was even higher. Men are more likely to drink and take drugs on their own to deal with their mood. Their biggest worries are work, finances, and health, in that order. There have been improvements, definitely, over the last decade or so. Women are still more likely than men to seek a therapist, but more men are willing to seek a therapist now. However, they would prefer it online, they'd prefer it anonymous. Just as many men now as women are willing to see a GP. So there have been improvements, but they're still skewed. Less men, more women will seek help when they need it. You only have to go back a decade, and in poll after poll, men said that they would rather smash things up than actually talk about their feelings. And I mean, that has its advantages. I can attest to that. I come from a very troubled background myself. When I was younger, especially when I was a teenager, there was the troubled background and the hormones. I didn't find life easy, and I didn't come from a family where it was particularly able to open up and talk about your feelings. And my mum used to keep like this small sledgehammer in a cupboard, and then she'd put broken furniture out in the garden, and sometimes she'd even scour skips in the area and bring stuff home. And when she could see that I was really struggling, out would come the sledgehammer. I would go into the garden and I would smash stuff up. And I did find it very therapeutic. A few years later, I discovered the joy of boxing, and boxercise and punch bags were a very good way of getting out my feelings. But I also discovered the power of psychotherapy. So not just punch bags, but also talking about my stuff. And the reason there's still this disparity between women and men when it comes to accessing mental health and actually opening up in the first place, first of all, it is still seen as a sign of weakness. So actually admitting there's a problem is perceived as weakness, when actually it takes strength to say, I have a problem, I need to talk to somebody. There's also this notion of a stiff upper lip. I hear it used a lot in my therapy room. You've got to keep a stiff upper lip, and people think that it means to soldier on, to carry on regardless, or to bury everything down, and the only way you can tell something's going on is because your lip is quivering. But that's not what it means, and I'll be coming to that in a minute, and it'll be kind of the thread that runs throughout the rest of the presentation. Men are also not very good at spotting the warning signs. Women are, and they will spot the signs earlier and talk about them earlier. And men only think they're in trouble when it's got really, really bad. So we're talking about when it's got to the point of self-harm, or what we call suicidal ideation. Suicidal ideation is a range. It starts off as, I don't see any point in being here. It goes up to, I don't see any point in me being here. It goes on to, I don't want to be here. And it goes on to, I'm actively planning to not be here. So it's a spectrum, but it starts with, I don't see any point. But quite often when a man says that, people agree with him, go, oh, I know, it's horrible, isn't it? Me too sometimes. And it gets dismissed when actually it's an early warning sign. Women also reticent, and other men as well, to actually, they spot the early warning signs of somebody, but they don't want to say anything in case it causes more harm than good. Now, when I start talking about the tips and the tools that can help you in this presentation, because it is only going to be 45 minutes, I'm skimming the surface of what is clearly, from 113 questions, a much deeper issue. But as I'm talking, I'm not just talking to men, and I'm not just talking to white men. I'm talking to men from any background, any culture, anywhere, anyone who identifies as male, but also anyone that wants to help. Because the tools that I'm going to give you aren't just to help you, they're also to help you have communication about these issues with others. So if you send in questions, I invite you to reflect on those questions and the possible answers through the filter of the stuff that I'm going to talk about, albeit briefly, for the rest of this presentation. Because men are reticent about opening it up, it's partly a sign of weakness. They see it as a sign of weakness. It's also partly they don't want to burden other people because they know everyone else is struggling and they don't want to add to everybody else's struggles. But there are places where men do open up, and it's been noted. There's this organisation called the Lions Barber Collective, and it was started in 2015 by a Torquay-based barber whose friend did complete suicide. But he realised that actually his shop floor wasn't just about hair and beards. It was a therapy space people used to offload. So they started training barbers to look out for those early signs, to offer sound therapeutic advice, to signpost people to professionals if needed, because men talk to their barbers. It's also been noted that tattoo artists are also very, very similarly and uniquely placed to reach out to men for the very similar reason. They go there, they build a relationship of trust with these people, and they possibly offload in a way that they wouldn't with their family and their friends. And there is an initiative very similar to the Lions Barber Collective that was started by the veterans charity Help for Heroes in association with the Zero Suicide Alliance to train tattoo artists to again spot the signs, offer advice, signpost. What they've created is with the Barbershop Collective, it's international, the tattoo one is national, is a series of mental health first aiders. And I'm a mental health first aid England trained mental health first aider, as well as being a psychotherapist. I'm there to spot signs, I can be accessed as a resource, I can signpost to people like me. And it's just acknowledging that men may not be reaching out to you, but they do reach out to somebody, and that somebody can do something about it. But what are those signs? Basically, any change in character should put you on notice. Any change in character. We normally think of short tempers because that's the most obvious one. Somebody who's normally calm isn't anymore, but it's somebody who's happy who isn't, somebody who's loud and social isn't, somebody that's normally quiet is extra socializing. An increased consumption of ... We normally think of alcohol or drugs, either prescription or recreational, but it can be an increased consumption of television, of PlayStation, of gambling, of porn, of this, of that, of anything. It's an increase of something. It's a way that blotting something out. Sleep problems that have come across suddenly, they are a sign. Any change in eating habits, eating way more, eating way less, they're all just, they're not definite proof, they're just indicators, signs that something could be up. And you'll need to do something about it if they are. Stiff upper lip. It doesn't mean burying your feelings deep. It doesn't mean carrying on regardless. It means fortitude in the face of adversity and the correct expression of emotion. Some therapies say that it's all anxiety, it's all bad, we're just going to reduce the symptoms as much as possible, or it's all anger, it's all depression, it's all bad, we're just going to reduce the symptoms as much as possible. But I've got a therapy that I'll be coming to that says that our emotions are valid, that they're there for a reason, that there's a constructive way of expressing that emotion or a not constructive way of expressing the emotion. So you can talk about your feelings, but you can express them in a constructive or a destructive way, and it depends on your interpretation of it. But fortitude in the face of adversity isn't courage, and it doesn't mean soldiering on regardless. That's not what fortitude is. Fortitude is also the ability to admit when you need help. You're not alone. It's not just you against the world. So the stiff upper lip doesn't mean what most people think it means. The stiff upper lip means that. And there's a therapy that can help you build it. It's called rational emotive behavior therapy. It is a therapy, but it's not only a therapy. It's a form of cognitive behavior therapy, CBT. So it's a form of psychotherapy that can help with anxiety, with anger, with depression, with addictions, with all sorts. It's also a coaching tool. So it's used in business coaching and it's used in life coaching, but it's also considered to be a school of thought in its own right. So if you adopt its concepts and its principles, it's just a great way for everybody to look at life in a much more calmer and much more rational way. So what I'm going to talk about when I talk about REBT are these broad concepts. It's got a philosophy, and the philosophy is that it's not the events in life that disturb you, it's what you are telling yourself about those events that does the disturbing. So if you are stuck, if you are thinking and feeling and acting in ways that you don't like, but don't seem to be able to change, it's not the thing, it's what you're telling yourself about the thing. And the idea is if you change what it is that you're telling yourself, you'll get to change how you think, how you feel, how you act. It's not saying that when stuff happens, it doesn't have an influence, because it does. Life can be horrible, life can be difficult, life can be challenging. But even in the face of the horrible and the difficult and the challenging, you can still remain in control or regain that control if you think you've lost it by looking at what you're telling yourself about that difficulty, that challenge, that horrible thing. And this is a different thing for different people. REBT says that for all of us, there's always this specific situation. For all of us, we will have a reaction that's specific to that situation. But REBT says that between that thing and that reaction to it unconsciously, there is a very specific belief system at play. And it's the belief that will either disturb you or keep you functional. Change the beliefs, change the outcome. Here is a belief system. Let's say this is me. Let's say that I take pride in my punctuality. And let's say that I am on a train and I am on my way to an important appointment, maybe a live presentation instead of a webinar. And this is my belief system about my timekeeping. I like to be on time for everything. But I know I don't have to be. I'm not going to like it if I'm not on time. For me, it's a bad thing, but it's not awful. It's not the end of the world or anything like that. Well, let's say that that train gets delayed really, really badly, and I realise that I am not going to make that appointment. Well, I'm hoping you can see that that belief system is quite calm and it's quite constructive. Obviously, I want to be on time and I'm not, so I might be a little bit worried. I might be a little bit frustrated, but otherwise I'm going to be calm and constructive. So I'm going to contact people, I'm going to inform, I'm possibly going to rearrange. And when I've made that contact, I will sit there, and with that kind of a mindset, I'll probably do something constructive with my time. Do some work, read a book, go on social media, etc. Look out the window. Here's a completely different belief system. Hell no, I must be on time for everything. I must. It's me, that's my thing, and if I don't get it, it is awful. It is like the end of the world to me. Well, let's say I'm on the same train, let's say I'm on the way to the same appointment, let's say that I'm going through exactly the same delay. If that's my mindset, we're going to get a completely different set of reactions. I'm not going to be frustrated, I'm going to be angry, and I'm not going to be worried, I'm going to be anxious. I might inform people, but I'm going to make an angry, anxious, stressy kind of a communication. I might be blaming myself, I might be ranting about the network, I might be ranting at the onboard services manager. And after I've made that contact, I'm not going to do anything constructive with my time. I'm just going to stew in it. Well, let's say that I am. I'm sitting there, I'm stewing in it, I'm ranting, I'm raving, I'm sitting in a delayed train telling myself I must be on time for everything. It is awful when I'm not. But then the driver makes an announcement, totally apologizes for the delay, says they're going to speed up the train to its maximum, miss out all those little remaining intermediary stations to get everybody to their destination on time, which includes me. Well, if I want to be on time and I've just been told I'm going to be on time, I'm going to calm down. I'm relieved. But I'm not safe in my relief. I'm vulnerable in my relief because I'm still telling myself I must be on time for everything. It is awful when I'm not. So the train only has to slow down or stop and I'm right back in it. And the point of those scenarios is the point of REBT, and it's this, and we all do it, all human beings, all of us everywhere. We're all prone to emotional disturbance when we don't get what we demand we must have. And we're prone to further emotional disturbance, even if we do get the thing we're demanding that we must have, because we can always lose it. Things can change. It's only when you can express a preference, but at the same time accept you don't have to have it even though you want it, then you can remain psychologically healthy. And in the scenarios we went through, it's the difference between being a little bit worried on the delayed train or really stressed and anxious on the same delayed train. So we just apply that thinking to any problem, any adversity. And REBT has this framework to deal with adversity. It's called the ABCDE model of psychological health, and that's what A stands for: adversity, the thing, the problem, the situation, the challenge. C stands for consequences. It's your thoughts, it's your feelings, it's your behaviors, it's your emotions. So it's the way you think and the way you feel and the way you act in the face of that adversity. The adversity will be an influence on all of that, but only an influence. More directly, it triggers a belief system, and it's the belief system that actually guides those reactions. If you're saying, I must be on time for everything, stress and anger and anxiety is the reaction, is the consequence. But if you're going, well, I like to be on time, but I don't have to be, a little bit worry, a little bit frustration, but otherwise calm and constructive, is the consequence. REBT likes to identify and dispute unhealthy beliefs, and it likes to formulate and dispute healthy beliefs, weakening unhealthy, strengthening healthy. Bit by bit, it's helping you effect a shift from one way of thinking to the other. And when you can feel that shift take place, we know we've arrived at E. E means I have an effective, rational outlook on that same adversity. The problem is still the same, possibly. The challenge is still the same, possibly, but the way you think and feel in the face of it has changed for the better. When it comes to beliefs, there are 4 unhealthy beliefs, 4 healthy beliefs. The primary one is called a dogmatic demand. It takes the form of words like must, mustn't, should, shouldn't, got to, have to. And a demand is a rigid belief that disturbs you. That's its primary meaning. It's a rigid belief and it disturbs. And it's also the rigid expression of a desire for something. And there's something that you want to happen and you're telling yourself it must happen, or there's something that you don't want to happen and you're telling yourself it mustn't happen. It's a rigid belief that disturbs you. But I don't want that to be confused with what we call a conditional demand. A conditional demand just means that ABC must happen in order for XYZ to take place. So I must pass my exams, it's awful if I don't. It's not the same as I must pass my exam in order to get my promotion. The second one is just conditional. It's a statement of reality. Our demands are legion. We have preferences for everything. Preferences for what we want, preferences for how we like to be, preferences for how we like to be treated, preferences for what we like to eat and when we like to holiday. We are fine, we are reasonable, we are rational as long as we stick to our preferences. Unfortunately, the stronger the preference, the more likely it is that we're going to turn it into a demand. And when it's a demand, it becomes problematic for several reasons. And we're going to show you what those problems are. To disputing is actually a process. It's a series of exercises in REBT. The first one is just called disputing. It takes 3 very rational questions and challenges the beliefs with them. It ignores the emotions for 1 minute because the emotions are going to say something completely different. This is about just taking a step back and viewing things objectively. And sometimes that's the most helpful thing that you can do, is to take a step back from a problem and objectively look at what you're telling yourself about it. Is this belief true is an evidence-based question. It wants proof. If you say, yes, that statement's true, you need evidence. If you say, no, it's false, still need evidence. Does this belief make sense is all about common sense, really. Just because I think like this, does it logically follow that that is the outcome? And does it help is hopefully the most obvious one. There's a problem, there's a challenge, there's a situation. Does that belief help you to deal with that constructively? Yes or no? I've chosen respect because this crops up a lot in the therapy room. And a lot of it, we all want respect. and at home, at work, from our family, from our friends. And when we don't get it, we're not happy. So this respect thing crops up quite a lot. So I've just used it as a for instance. Let's take that demand, you must respect me. It's not true. People don't have to do anything. They can do what they want, and they often do. We can all evidence occasions when people have either actually not respected us or occasions when we have felt not respected. And those two things just prove that the statement's not 100% cast iron. You're already picking holes in it with evidence. Now, you might want respect. It's a nice thing to have, but just because you want something, it doesn't logically follow that you have to have it, because that's just not the way the world works. They're two different things. One's reasonable. This is what I'd like to happen. One is not reasonable, so it must happen. And it's not going to help you. It's rigid. There's no wiggle room. You're demanding one thing and one thing only. And if you don't get it, you are not going to behave reasonably or constructively. Here's a healthier version. I would prefer to be respected, but I don't have to be. Well, that is true. If you want respect, then you're being true to yourself. So it's true. It's also true that people don't have to, and you can show when they haven't. So you can back both parts of that statement up with evidence. Said this way, it's become sensible because you're just acknowledging the way the world works. This is what I would like to happen, but I also know I don't always get what I want. This is known as a flexible preference. It gives you that wiggle room. It gives you that moment to step back and choose a more constructive avenue in the face of that lack of respect. And you can apply that to any demand and any preference. Some people, when they don't get what they demand they must have a tendency to awfulize or to catastrophize. Awful means, even if you're doing it just for a moment, making something worse than it is, like literally the worst thing in your mind. It's awful not being respected. That's not true. You can always think of something worse. There are so many things more bad than being disrespected by somebody. And all the things that are more bad prove it's an awful. Now, it's bad. You're not going to like it. But just because something is bad, it doesn't logically follow that it's awful. And it doesn't help you to use that word. Awful blows everything out of proportion. Awful makes everything worse than it actually is. And if you've blown something out of proportion, your reaction by default cannot be proportionate. Here's a healthier version of that one. We call it anti-awfulizing. It's a more reasonable rating of badness. So it is bad. I do not like it if I'm not respected, but it's not awful. This is true. If you're not going to like it, it's bad. If you can think of worse, it's not awful. And it's the only sensible way of looking at anything. Okay, bad is one thing, not awful is the same thing. They're saying the same thing. And that would help you. It's the language of perspective. It could be a little bit bad, it could be fairly bad, it could be a whole heap of bad. But if you're looking at it that way, you're not making it any worse than it actually is. You have perspective, your reactions will be proportionate. Some people, when they hold demands, have a tendency to exhibit what we call low frustration tolerance. They will say things like, I can't stand it, I can't handle it, I can't cope with this is intolerable. None of those statements are true if you're saying them. If I could click my fingers and transport everybody that is watching this webinar into the middle of a boiling hot ocean, you would die, because people can't stand boiling hot water. It kills you very quickly. That's what I can't stand it literally means. And there are things in this world that you can't stand, they do kill you. Respect isn't one of them. And if you're buying into this concept, if you think, oh God, that is me, I do use things like I can't stand it and I can't cope quite a lot, you're here saying it, watching this webinar. So you have actually stood 100% of all the things you said you couldn't stand. So it's completely invalid. It doesn't make sense. Now, things can be difficult. If you don't get what you want, you'll feel challenged. You'll be out of your comfort zone. But just because you're out of your comfort zone, just because it's challenging, it doesn't logically follow that you can't tolerate it. They're two different things. And it doesn't help you. It's a very disempowering statement. And when you disempower yourself, you lose your coping strategies. Unhealthy coping strategies have a tendency to creep in. Alcohol is one, drugs are another. Suicidal ideation is an unhealthy coping strategy. The healthy version is known as high frustration tolerance. You're acknowledging the challenge and the difficulty, but also acknowledging that you'll get through it because you always have. So it's difficult if you don't respect me, but I know I can stand it. It's true. No one likes it, but we will get through it. It's the only sensible way to look at things as well. Okay, it's difficult. We deal with difficult things every day. I will deal with this. And this is an empowering statement. You are your own coping strategy. You will develop constructive coping strategies, not unhealthy coping strategies. And another unhealthy belief is all about put downs. This one's about putting the self down. So I am nothing. We say it a lot. Without respect, you're nothing. So I am nothing. I'm worthless without respect. Well, nobody's nothing. Nobody's rubbish. Nobody's worthless. Nobody's useless. You can all evidence success for a start. You can all evidence achievement. You can all evidence skills. You can all evidence good parts of your character. So you can't be a complete nobody, nothing, worthless, useless person. Now, you do make mistakes. Everybody does. But it doesn't make any sense to say you are a mistake just because you made a mistake. And it doesn't make sense to say that you are wrong completely just because you did something wrong. But that's how illogical that statement is. You're taking a negative, I didn't get respected, and judging all of yourself with it. And that is not going to do anything well or good for your confidence, your self-esteem, and the way you feel about yourself. The healthy version of that's called unconditional acceptance. So I'm not nothing, I'm not worthless. Even if you don't respect me, I am a worthwhile, fallible human being. Every word of that is true. You can evidence success, so you can't be rubbish. You can evidence mistakes, so you can be fallible. And we're all worthwhile. Every human being on this planet is the same. We're all equal. We all get it right, we all get it wrong. We've got things we're good at, we've got things we're rubbish at. We have good days, we have bad days. It's all the same. And we have every right to be that. We're fine as we are. We are worthwhile. So this applies to other people as well. Nobody else is an idiot or rubbish. That's not true. That doesn't make sense. That isn't helpful. They're also worthwhile, fallible human beings with good bits and bad bits and good days and bad days and achievements and mistakes. So you apply the same thing to yourself and to other people as well. Now, going back to this correct expression of emotion, as I said, REBT makes a distinction between what it considers an unhealthy negative emotion and a healthy negative emotion. Instead of anger, we have frustration. Instead of anxiety, we have worry. Instead of depression, we have sadness. Now, the emotions might feel very, very similar, but it's the way you act and the thoughts that you have in the face of them that let you know whether it's unhealthy or healthy. Anger, you explode with anger, but frustration means you're more likely to either have a conversation or just let it go. Anxiety is your fight or flight response, but sometimes there's stuff to worry about. Depression is about loss or failure, but life contains plenty of those, and so it's okay sometimes to be sad. The difference between the two different sets of emotions, the difference between your unhealthy and your healthy beliefs in REBT. So there is an adversity, there is an A, it might not be a pleasant one. So with your beliefs under control, it's completely normal. It's the correct expression of the emotion that's just sadly and regrettably appropriate to the situation that you are in. Now, all these notions of fortitude and disputing, not just used in REBT. This is an exercise borrowed from positive psychology. It's called real-time resilience, and it's used in resilience training programs pretty much the world over. It's also used in US Army training to help their recruits become more effective on the battlefield. It takes a lot of practice to get automatic with it, but it's an exercise I've used myself. First time I ever studied REBT, at the end of the course, I was asked to be a supervisor on the next course with a view to becoming a tutor myself. And so I supervised. I listened in on exercises, I answered questions, I offered advice. The first time that I was ever asked to teach, I was sitting there on the day, I was a bit nervous, I knew that I was going to be asked, but the tutor just went, okay, right, we are going to break for coffee. We will be back in 15 minutes, and after that, my colleague Daniel Fryer at the back will be teaching you about this. And as he said that, 20 pairs of student eyeballs all turned around and zeroed in on me. My face went bright red, I got hot, my heart rate elevated, and I felt the overwhelming need to go to the toilet and do a poo. all completely natural. I knew that this was worry, not anxiety, because I knew it wasn't going to stop me teaching, but I'd never stood in front of the class and taught before. As I did my teaching segment, I suddenly went, oh God, they're going to ask me questions in a minute. What if I can't answer them? What if I get a question I can't be asked? That'd be awful. Well, I could immediately dispute it. It's not true. It's not going to be awful. I won't like it, but it's not awful. It's not the end of the world if I can't answer a question. Well, that dispute allows me to formulate a helpful alternative. Do you know what? I'm right. It's not awful. I'm pretty good at this. I answered every question as a supervisor. I do know my staff. This will probably be fine. And that helpful alternative allowed me to strategize. I come up with a solution. If X, then Y. If somebody asks me a question and I can't answer it, I will take their details. I will get back to them. And that real-time resilience exercise helped me not just through that hairy episode, but other teaching moments. And then when I went on to do really big presentations, it still helps. And now you will have to write these down initially. If you want to use this exercise, you have to write them down and then get really good at writing them down. But with practice, you get really good at thinking like that in the moment. So these tools that I've given you aren't just specific to REBT, they're specific also to resilience training programs. Resilience is just another word for fortitude and the correct expression of emotion. There's always practical stuff to do. We know what it is, we don't always do it. So I've been working in mental health for about 18 years, and I've noticed that there is a move in from GPs, doctors and psychiatrists away from a pills first prescription and a look at lifestyle and therapy first. So time passed, you go to the doctor, you go to the psychiatrist, you go, I'm anxious, they go, here's a pill. I'm depressed, here's a pill. Now they're asking you about your nutrition, your exercise and your sleep. Because those three things alone, if they're brought into balance, will do wonderful things for your mental health, for your resilience. And the first two, eating well and exercising properly, will actually help the third one, sleep, anyway. So a lot of the time they're saying to people, okay, well, we're going to improve your nutrition, we're going to improve your exercise, we're going to improve your sleep, we're going to give you a course of therapy. I'll see you again in 12 weeks for a review. If that hasn't worked, then maybe we can think about medication. So practical stuff first, medication second. Another important thing is connection. Men weren't as good at this prior to the pandemic, before they're as good at connection as women. We've all got worse since the pandemic. We are human beings, we are social creatures, and we need to feel connected to others. Men are notorious for either having not many mates or just kind of fair weather, lightweight banter mates, when actually it's really good for your mental health and well-being if you've got at least one or two people that you can have really deep and meaningful conversations with. Maybe that connection is with your barber, maybe that connection is with your tattoo artist, but you do need it. Mindfulness is another way of also just taking time out for yourself and resetting the stress system. And mindfulness itself is very practical. You can have exercises where you just focus on your breathing to meditate mindfully, focus on brushing your teeth or eating food, even queuing in the queue at Sainsbury's can be a mindfulness exercise. Anything that helps you build your resilience is going to help. REBT, CBT, mindfulness does it. Anything, any kind of therapy, any kind of system, any kind of coaching that helps you build your resilience is going to help your mental health and well-being. And one of the most important things is knowing when to stop, because we don't, men especially, but we don't know, or we're taught not to. But if we don't stop, we break down. And we break down physically and we break down psychologically. So stopping is essential for our mental and our physical health. But our culture's wired wrong. Take work. At work, we favour the people who don't stop. The first in, last out, working through their lunch, answering their emails at night. We think, what a good worker. No, they're not. They're really stressed. Stress is the #1 cause of staff absenteeism. The #1 cause of that stress is not stopping. They are less productive than people who know when to stop. They are more prone to making big, costly mistakes than the people that know when to stop. They're more likely to take off time sick with stress. And they also leave companies far quicker because they've burnt out. People who come in on time, who leave on time, who take regular breaks, who know how to achieve that work-life balance. They're the ones that are happier, healthier, more productive, less prone to making mistakes, and staying with the company far longer. So they're saving you money in terms of recruitment and training. These are all the practical things that you can do. We all know them. It's about actually doing them and putting them into practice on a regular basis to enhance your mental health. Now, I just want to finish off with a couple of things. You know, is men still, the improvements have been made, but men don't like talking to therapists. And if they did, they'd like to do it online. They'd like to do it anonymously. Try not to think of them as therapists. We all know what a personal trainer is, and there is absolutely no stigma attached to accessing a personal trainer. If you want to get fit, lose weight, tone up, they'll see us daily, weekly. They'll develop programs for us, and we follow them and we talk about them. It's all good. Well, people like me are just personal trainers for your mind, which is the most important bit of kit you've got. And in fact, so much so, there's now a centre opened up in London called the Mind Gym. So it's a gym for the mind, personal trainers in it for your mind. If you don't really like the personal trainer analogy, we all know about cars, really. Even if you haven't got one at the moment or don't drive, technically, we all know how to keep a car ticking over in optimal condition. You need weekly checks. You need monthly checks. You need a regular service every few thousand miles or years. And every year, there's the MOT. And that's how you keep a car ticking over nicely. Well, you are way more complicated than any vehicle on the road, but you've probably never had a weekly check or a monthly check or a service. MOT's due, big end is gone. Just think of me as a mechanic for your mind. And if that helps destigmatize the process, then all to the good. Finally, I just want to say thank you to our friends and partners. I have spoken a little bit quicker to wrap it up at 45 minutes rather than 50, just in case there are as many questions as there were this morning. I hope that's been useful. I hope that you've got some tips and takeaways from today. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
Thank you so much, Daniel. As Daniel just said, if you still like to send in questions, please feel free to, and they will remain anonymous. So we have a couple here, Daniel. Why does positive affirmation have to come from other men to add to validity or have value? Doesn't this risk embedding narrow stereotypes?
It's not about just having positive affirmations for men. It's having a positive male role model that you can go to for support. That's it. It's not about a positive affirmation only for men. A positive affirmation from anyone is good, but you know, we have communities. We used to live in tribes, and everybody used to look out for everybody in the tribe. Then we had generational families, and then we had nuclear families, and then we got rid of the nuclear family where we have single parent families. We have families where it's two mums or two dads, and it's not that the children in families like that suffer, and it's that you're not going to suffer more if you don't have a mum or you don't have a dad or you just have two dads or two mums. It's just that creating equal, not just one or the other male role models for men, but making sure that there are both. But positive affirmations can come from anywhere.
With your saying of A, B, C, D, E, could you just reiterate what the letters stood for again?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the presentation is going to be accessible afterwards, but A stands for adversity. So it's the problem, it's the situation, it's the challenge, it's the event. It can be a person. B stands for beliefs. Must, awful, can't stand it, failure are 4 types of beliefs. I would prefer, but I don't have to have. Bad but not awful. It's difficult. I can deal with it. I'm not a failure. I'm a worthwhile, fallible human being. Are healthy beliefs. It's the beliefs that decide the consequences. It's the beliefs that decide how you're going to react in the face of the adversity. If you don't like the consequence, you dispute the beliefs so that you end up with an effective, rational, healthier, constructive outlook in the face of the same problem or challenge.
Perfect. And how would you say it's best to start a conversation on this in a workplace as a manager?
As a manager, I think we need to create open door policies. We need to constantly in not so subtle and subtle ways that this is a destigmatized environment. There is no mental health stigma in this place. My door is open. We are HR. We are here to support you in any kind of difficulty, including mental health. So people feel free to talk about these things. But also, people spend most of their day at work. So as a manager, you probably know them as well as their friends and their partners. So if you even suspect, is that an early warning sign? Just ask. If you're too afraid to ask, unhealthy beliefs are what are preventing you from asking. But just ask, are you all right? If you need to talk about it, you do know where I am, and that it's perfectly fine for you to talk about these things. I'm here to support you. And just keep doing that over and over again.
And do you have any tips for when someone's been thinking negatively for so long that they feel as though it's hard to even notice the thoughts, let alone be able to dispute them?
If that's that ingrained, then they're going to need more than a few tips from a webinar. They're probably going to need to see somebody that's going to help take them out of that mindset over a number of weeks with a number of exercises that they do have to bring in and be accountable to that person to show that they're doing that. Because otherwise it's easy just to not be able to see the forest for the trees.
How would you also say is best to go about accessing a therapist?
Well, there are databases. I mean, obviously, you know, everyone thinks of the NHS or their local medical provider as their first port of call. There's this portal called Psychology Today. It's global. And you type in your area, your region, your postcode, and it lists all the accredited practicing therapists in your area. I'm a member of it. Their application process is quite stringent, so anyone on there is an effective practitioner. So there's that. I mean, here in the UK, we've got other places. We've got the counselling directory is another one. We have the BABCP. We have whoever are the accredited bodies in your area will also have lists of therapists. So find them online. If you think cost is a factor, you can even Google low cost therapists in your area. A lot of them will offer sliding scale therapies.
Thank you. And do you have any books or websites you would recommend?
Yeah, for books, I mean, if you want a book on REBT, just put REBT into Amazon. You'll find one by me. You'll find one by two of my mentors. One's a guy called Avi Joseph. One's another guy called Wendy Dryden, who's written like 100 books on the subject, if REBT interests you. Otherwise, I would just suggest going on there and typing by the thing it is that you want help with. Is it anxiety? Is it depression? Is it anger management? Is it assertiveness? And then, you know, Amazon exists for a reason, whether you like it or not, and people review the books. Have a look at the book and the contents and the reviews that you think resonate with you, and then go for that book.
And what would your advice be for someone who is looking to get help for their children or son, ensuring that they have healthy strategies for dealing with their issues as they grow up?
Yeah. I think things like REBT and resilience training, like that exercise and CBT, should be taught in schools, because life's getting harder and the kids are getting bombarded from all sides, and so they need to be taught those coping strategies. If they haven't got them and you think they need them, there are therapists that do work with young people.
Do you have any advice for an employee who is struggling to open up the HR department themselves and talk about their mental health? What steps can they take to make the workplace better?
And what do they mean by struggles? That they're struggling to talk, as in they're too afraid, or they're meeting
so they don't get the right advice, or they don't feel as though they can talk to management?
Right. Well, I don't know if they're holding themselves back with their own beliefs and they're just too nervous, then work on that and approach anyway. Sadly, all the strides we have made in certain areas, in certain industries, in certain countries, even people aren't as approachable. That depends on employment laws. I mean, I only know about the employment laws in this country, and in this country, you have to take a mental health issue seriously. So if you're having a struggle, that that's a legal issue. You could decide to pursue that if you want. If you're getting a mental health issue because of work and work isn't helping you or is stonewalling you, change the job. You are a worthwhile, fallible human being with skills and attributes. There are other opportunities out there. Find somebody that would validate you. Find somebody that would support you when you're going through a difficulty.
When you spoke about having a work-life balance, how would you best say is able to manage this, ensuring that they also have time for themselves as well as their family?
That is a really good question. That is an entire webinar in and of itself, the eternal search for a good work-life balance. It's very interesting. That does include yourself. Work, family life, downtime for yourself. It does include that. The ratio for that is up to the individual. So I can't offer any easy solutions to that other than how have you parceled up your time? Are you working more hours than is necessary? Can you rein that in and free up more free time for your family and yourself? Then the ratio of that's up to you.
Thank you. We've also got a question in here directly for you saying, do you do IBT sessions that people could access?
Why? Yes, I see people one-to-one. I see them on face-to-face in my clinic or online. The evidence for online therapy is overwhelming. It's just as effective as face-to-face. But if you Google REBT in your area, you will probably find REBT therapists local if you want the face-to-face touch and you're nowhere near Bristol, which is where I live.
Thank you. Do you also have any advice on how to be aware that you are facing a burnout and how best to cope with this?
Burnout is, firstly, it's purely an occupational phenomena, burnout. And it wasn't really identified, well, people have been burning out for years, it wasn't really identified until 2019. Exhaustion is a clue. And what they call cynicism or negativity. So you used to be positive and happy in your role, but now you're not. You say horrible things about it. You criticize it, the job, the company, the role. And your personal efficacy has been reduced. So you're exhausted, you're cynical, and you're not performing very well. These are all clues that you are in that burnout zone. The exhaustion in enough is on its own is enough to tell you. Early warning signs also include insomnia, constantly thinking about work when you're not at work. Listen to those telltale signs. They are telling you something.
Do you also have any warning signs in terms of suicide planning and the best way to prevent this in younger children?
Yeah, it's a little difficult to spot in children because they tend to be even more secretive than adults. But it really is, I mean, if you just want to know, ask. It doesn't mean they're going to be honest. Definitely works with adults. GPs are always asking, how do we tell? How do we tell if someone is? And it turns out the easiest way to tell if somebody's thinking about it is to just ask them outright, do you feel suicidal? Obviously, with the child, you want to approach that in a more gentle, not so blunt way and ask them what they're thinking. Are they happy with their lives? Do you like being here? That really, really, really early warning sign. Honestly, it can start with, I just don't see the point. I don't see the point in being here. I don't see the point of me. If you hear that, your ears should prick up.
Thank you. And in terms of loneliness, would you say this really has an effect on your mental health? How can you reach out to people if you struggle as an introvert?
Oh, God, again, that is another webinar in and of itself. I do a lot of work with loneliness. Loneliness is a pathological condition that's completely different to being alone. We all like to be alone sometimes, and we value it. Lonely involves intense feelings of isolation. Whether people there are or not, you can feel intensely isolated in a room full of people. And yes, it can have detrimental effects to your psychological well-being. It can also have detrimental effects to your physical well-being. It affects your cardiovascular system, your immune system. And with introverts, you can be the most introvert person on the planet, and you still need contact with someone else. The most introvert person on the planet is still a human being, and therefore a social animal that will need some sort of contact. Unfortunately, a lot of introverts think that they don't need it at all. They do. But there's also was an interesting study. The results were released last year, I think. And you know, people just assume that the introverts are going to say no to any kind of offer of a social event, and so they don't get asked. And people think that's just respecting the introvert, and that often ends up having the introvert feel even more lonely because they feel excluded. And the simple solution was to just ask and keep on asking. And just accepting that 9 times out of 10 that introvert might say no, but they will say no whilst feeling included and not as lonely as if they weren't asked in the first place. But also every 1 time out of 10 they're going to surprise everybody by saying yes. So if you know an introvert, look after them and invite them.
Thank you. And then finally, do you have any tips for reducing drinking alone with depression?
Don't do it. Being on your own is depressing. Drink is a depressant. So those 2 things together are going to depress you even further. If that's a man asking that question, it was a big thing. Men are really good at doing that, drinking and taking drugs on their own because they're in a bad mood or a bad space. Again, that's a sign. You know, there's a whole world of difference between having a beer or a glass of wine on your own on a night just because you fancy it, and drinking because you just feel fed up or alone. And it's the reason that you're doing it. And if you're doing it for a not good reason, you need to get help.
Perfect. Thank you, Daniel. And thank you, everyone, for all your questions. We did manage to get through them all. Just a reminder, the recording is being sent out to you via an email either today or tomorrow. There will also be a survey pop up when you leave the webinar if you'd like to leave some feedback. So I know a lot of you did find today's webinar helpful. Please do. Thank you so much again, Daniel, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye-bye.